Okay, today it's good to see you. We're looking at John William Burgon, or affectionately known as Dean Burgon. I'm reading it from this book. It's an old book, and he was monumental in scholarship in textual criticism of the 19th century. Nomen intra has ade semper venerandum. These words, taken from the inscription under Cardinal Wolsey's bust, a quadrangle of Christ Church, may not unsuitably be prefixed to an article on Dean Burgon in the Quarterly Review. Within these precincts, if anywhere, the Dean's name is to be held in respectful remembrance. With this review his relations were long and intimate. To those responsible for its conduct he was bound by ties of mutual regard. John William Burgon was born on August the 21st, 1813. His father, Mrs. Burgon, was a merchant of London, and paternally his descent was purely English, but his mother, Catherine de Cranmer, was the daughter of the Austrian consul at Smyrna by a Miss Maltus, a lady who had Greek at Cimronite blood in her veins, and a sister of that Mrs. Baldwin, whose beauty created a sensation both in Vienna and in London, procured for her attentions from the Prince of Wales, afterwards George IV, and elicited even from Dr. Johnson a burst of clumsy amorousness, and whose portrait by Sir Joshua Reynolds, formerly in the collection of Strawberry Hill, was the spring sold by Mercer's. Mr. Thomas Burgon was a high Tory and a high churchman, an antiquary and connoisseur. He dealt in Greek and Turkish produce, and the nature of his business obliged him to reside for several years at Smyrna, where his eldest son John William was born. But shortly after the boy's birth he returned to England, and London was henceforth his home. John William Burgon, during the first 11 years of his life, was taught by his mother. In 1824 he was sent to a private school at Putney, and subsequently to one at Blackheath. We do not find that he has made any special proficiency in classical study, but he was a thoughtful and precocious boy, in fact was suspect, not a little of a prig. Reviewing at the age of 20 on some records of his school days, he says, "I noticed the same love of books and of study, the same hatred of school and contempt for the society of my equals in age, which, since I was 11 and first went to school, I have never been able to shake off." From early days his mind was of a seriously, though not emotionally, religious cast. At the age of 16 he was confirmed, and it is curious to find that, though he was constant in his attendance at church, he only communicated twice in the next 5 years. What makes this fact the more remarkable is that at this period his heart was set on taking holy orders, though the fulfilment of this design was unavoidably deterred. Difficulties destined before long to be fatal were beginning to gather round his father's business, and it became necessary for young Burgon, instead of proceeding to Oxford or Cambridge, to enter the paternal counting house. He disliked it more than I can tell, writes his sister, and found relief only in the pursuit of poetry and art during his leisure moments when he returned from the city. These scanty intervals of leisure he used with praiseworthy diligence. He attended lectures at the University of London, worked hard at archaeology and kindred studies, published a considerable number of fugitive pieces, both in prose and verse, and one work of more pretentious, a historical treatise on the life and times of Sir Thomas Gresham. Meanwhile he had the advantage of early and frequently access to the society of literary men, whom he met at his father's table, and his annual holiday were occupied in excursions which seemed generally to have had historical or archaeological research for the subject. A visit paid to Mr. Dawson Turner at Yarmouth in April 1838 had, however, an interest of a different kind, and we gather from his biographer's hint that it was only the constraining sense of domestic duty and the absolute necessity of trying to relieve his father's embarrassed finances that restrained him from offering marriage to his host daughter. As some 10 years rolled by, and the skies were darkened for a storm, it broke on August 19, 1841, when Thomas Burgon's house suspended payment and bankruptcy ensued. The crash of his father's fortune proved an unspeakable blessing to John William Burgon. It terminated his commercial career at a stroke and left him free to follow the bent of his own inclinations. He had long desired to go to Oxford with a view to seeking holy orders, and this desire was now fulfilled. On August 23rd, 1841, he wrote to his friend, to Dr. Dawson Turner, who had generously offered him pecuniary aid. My backwardness in Greek, especially in what you would not believe, and indeed my ignorance generally, is frightful, he said. On October 21st, 1841, Burgon matriculated at Oxford as a commoner of Worcester College, having chosen the society on the commendation of Dr. Pusey, whose brother-in-law, Dr. Cotton, was its provost. Owing to domestic engagements connected with the winding up of his father's affairs and his family removal from the old home, he did not begin residence at Oxford till the following year. Once established there, he threw himself with a characteristic earnestness into his new life, and was equally attentive to the religious and educational duties of the place. And so Burgon went on to be one of the great scholars of the 19th century, especially in the area of textual criticism. He was so brilliant that he was basically one of the main authorities in that period of history. His scholarship has generally been forgotten now, and it needs to be revived. So I'll put a link to some of his work, and I would encourage you as a scholar to revisit Burgon and revisit some of his ideas, because they need to be reintroduced to textual criticism, and I hope that you would do that as a scholar in textual criticism if you are. Thank you for listening, and take care.